We heard very instructive presentations by each member of our panel, but I just wanted to add a question that's maybe constructed, but what did you mean, Stuart, when you made reference to distractor analysis if it were to apply to the behavior of leaders in Washington? I mean, if you took that term from metric and applied it in the political environment.
Well, I wouldn't use that term in the political environment.
Can you state what you'd say?
Yeah. Well, you had to give a little background to it. But multiple choice items have multiple options. One correct answer and 3 incorrect, typically. Okay? And it's more common in math than other subjects. But when you see that the students added one third and 1/2 and got 2/5, you say, okay, that's the mistake the kids made. Well, you're probably right for a lot of those kids, but not all of them, number one. Number two, I'd want a lot more than a single item to draw conclusions about the students. And so that's what I'm saying, that the distractor analysis is just saying this is where this distractor came from. This is the mistake, that the common mistake, and that's why we included it as an option in a multiple choice item, that by explaining where that option came from, that's distractor analysis, we're saying we know what's going on in the kid's mind.
Right. I was thinking about adults' distractor behavior. Questions? Yes. Identify yourself and your affiliation if you...
Hi, thank you all. Thank you all. This is Thompson Becker. I'm in the.
I'm very nice.
This is Thompson Becker. I'm in the AFT Research Department.
I have to translate this.
I had a question, probably for all of you, but probably for Andrew in particular, particularly about social studies curriculum and social studies testing. I know I'm from Chicago, and a lot of public schools, CPS, for example, they're cutting a lot of public school teachers, particularly in social studies, because social studies is not tested. In certain tests, it's not tested. So how can we think about good social studies curriculum and good social studies tests that teachers can then teach? Because obviously, it seems to me quite hard. I mean, I know from being high school and middle school, it's hard to teach social studies well. Like, what do you choose? Like, what do you teach? Like, do you teach how do you focus on gender? Like, there's so many facts that you can include when you're teaching American history, for example. So how do you create good tests, and how do you keep social studies?
How to create good social studies tests
as a student and growth and political.
Go ahead.
Well, we just did a visit to a number of schools that have applied for membership in the consortium, and these are schools that are under the present regime of taking the Regents exam. So they all have 2 Regents exams in social studies, and the teachers were excited about the idea of not being bound to that particular curriculum to teach global, which are mostly survey courses. I mean, I think one of the problems with multiple choice tests or tests that have short answer responses, what is it you're trying to find out? What are you trying to get at? And typically, the curriculum for those kinds of courses that are testable are survey. Well, that's not a really very exciting way to get, particularly to teenagers. I mean, it's not just teenagers, but there was a study done at the City University not so long ago where they went in and looked to see what was the freshmen taking in social studies, and then they tracked them. And the kids who all took survey courses never took another social studies course again, and the students who took a sort of theme-related or problem or question-related course in their freshman year all took most of them took additional courses because they got into it, they read primary source materials, they got very excited about it. So I think the problem is that as long as we have standardized multiple choice testing that is used by most cities or most places, I think you're going to have a problem with how you break away from that and really teach, except in electives, teach kids the exciting things about social studies. And I think, students get very interested in all kinds of topics, Who made the movement? Did King make the movement, or did the movement make King? I mean, a course in the history of the civil rights movement touches on everything. It touches on the Constitution. It touches on the Civil War. It touches on the modern civil rights movement. It touches on what is a hero? Is there a hero? Kids really like that material, and they're willing to spend time reading difficult text. They're willing to spend time writing because they care about it. So I don't know whether we can get to a place where we get students excited and engaged if we continue to use the kinds of multiple choice mass standardized testing that we seem to be so committed to. I don't know if that answers your question. But
Yeah, we have another response to it, and then we have questions here. Let me give you an apology, a number: 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Actually, Ann said something I think is real important, and she talked about writing. And I've heard writing described as thinking on paper. And it's so obvious that when you're dealing with big ideas, they're big ideas in science, big ideas in social studies, when you look at the kids' writing, it's so obviously which ones are getting that big idea and which ones aren't. And so to me, that's a key. Oddly enough, I was mentioned I taught elementary school and I taught math. There are times I wish I had. Now, if I had to do it again, I'd be asking my kids, even in math, to explain why they did something and doing a computation. And I bet I'd learn a heck of a lot about whether they understood some aspects of place value and other things. But anyway, but thinking in a broader sense of social studies, what a great area to be really tackling some big thematic. Big themes in social studies. I'd also add, I think back to just a particular question that I remember from years back. It was a constructed response question. And it was on demand, and it basically said certain groups of people are awarded or given their rights at a particular time in history, but very often those rights aren't realized except piecemeal over time. Pick a group, left it open. Minority, women, whatever it might be. Mm-hmm. Pick a group and track that progression throughout history. And if it's something that you think is fair game for an on-demand type test, that's one thing. But think of it as an activity too, and where the kids can. That's a topic. Mm-hmm. That's a topic they can go and research and write a paper on. It doesn't have to be a long paper, but my point is that you really get a lot out of reviewing what the kids say and write.
I know these are all important questions, but want to get as many in as possible.
I just want to add one thing, and I think you're raising the question about teachers feeling like they're teaching non-testable subjects and nobody's paying attention to it. I think they need to grab the moment and get the figure out curriculum that's really interesting to the kids, because I think out of all the subjects that that are being taught that are testable, they can do a job of getting kids turned on to something that's much more exciting. I mean, I always remember in New York State at the English language arts standards called for testing in reading, writing, speaking, listening. And fortunately, we all said, the test only did listening, writing, and reading. It never tested anything for speaking. And thank goodness, because I think they would have just made a hash of it. I don't know what they would have done. But I think that the people who are teaching things like art and history and music, who now are arguing that their subject should be testable because that's the only way to get people to pay attention, I would say that's a big mistake. I think they should go back. They should do some organizing and try to get support for a non-testing environment in their school, because I think the surest way to have them teaching things they don't want to teach is to have it be subjected to what will surely be some kind of massive standardized test.
Number 2.
Hi, my name is Rob Hanna. I'm from the Center for American Progress. I had a question, kind of a topic that came up a little earlier about kind of school-wide accountability versus kind of other types of accountability for teachers or for monitoring student learning individually. And we've kind of talked about different types of tasks that kids could do, more robust performance tasks, multiple choice ones. So my question is kind of like, are they different to do school-wide accountability versus other types? Why would they be different? Could they be done on the same test? And how would they have to play out differently if they really were in fact different?
Yeah, well, you know what? Maybe I'll give the answer that I think Stuart was going to say. 2 words, matrix sampling. So when he was referring to matrix sampling, so the question was really about, is it different for school accountability than, I presume, student and teacher, right? So my quick answer would be, my guess would be that when you are trying to compare, performance of whole schools, sampling from that school could be required, wouldn't necessarily require every student in every class, all the time, and it provides some ability to sort of draw a random sample, and that can be more efficient. Is that?
Yeah. Well, when you're testing, you're sampling 2 things. And in fact, the psychometricians will talk about an item by student matrix anyway. And when you're just testing at a grade level, for example, that's just a sampling of students. Even if you test every grade, it's the students that year, that represent the students in a community, or represent, so a much larger population. And when you're building a test, you're sampling items. I mean, somewhere in one of your slides, it was clear that you want, a test is only as good as the quality of the sample of a particular domain. And so the computer doesn't know, when it comes to that item by student matrix, computer sees those words, item and student, as labels on an axis. It doesn't know the difference. And so the point is, you can get high quality data, by shifting the sampling a little bit. And so that's a low level answer in terms of the psychometrics. It produces very good school results. The student results, if the student just took a handful of items, obviously you don't want to count on that. But in terms of the performance of the students, you say, well, what if a student got this question or that? Well, the stronger students are going to do better on the items they get. The weaker students are going to get poorer answers on the answers on the questions they get than the stronger students who get that same form, and it all works out. It all balances out extremely well. California years ago used to have very short tests, but they used as many as 60 or 80 test forms. Now, we're probably talking all multiple choice at that time, but in terms of the psychometric characteristics of that test, that matrix sampling produced very, very good, accurate results.
Hi, I'm Phil Piety. I'm a local author. I wrote a book that was published earlier this year by Teachers College Press. Yes. My name is Phil Piety. I wrote a book that was published earlier this year by Teachers College Press that covered a number of these topics. The title is Assessing the data with test score, and it will be the research on how data can be used to support artificial system. In 2004-2005, how data can be used today. Many of curriculum guides, evidence of student assignments, school improvement plans. So I just want to ask us to think more broadly when we use the term data than just the second comment is about standardized testing. Another piece of the standardized testing equation is the development to get into the tests to make claims from them more valuable, more broadly. Even there, there's noise. One of the arguments even under the best education methods, you have more noise than most other. So I think that how I would think about it, good tests and bad tests, is tests response to how to get to this value. Value-added model is cheaper, effective. Value-added model may be valuable, but they're often used on the cleanliness or the reliability of those tools. So my question to the panel is, if you think about the future beyond just testing, what would you describe as the best scenario where we don't rely on no information and on intuition? Because I think that's really a big piece of it, right? Some information versus none. What would it be besides tests, and how would tests of different kinds and other forms of information be used together?
I think we have to pay a lot more attention to what the tests are for. What are they for? What is it? It's partly in response to your question, gentleman over here. I don't quite understand what it is we want this information for, that we don't have some. I'm not saying we shouldn't have some testing. I'm all for sampling like the NAEP does. But I don't understand what most of the testing tells us that we don't already know. I mean, for starters, we know exactly how tests. Debbie Meyer and I in New York used to take every year, look at the test scores, and we knew without even looking what schools were in what neighborhoods, what zip codes. I mean, it's not a mystery that we have kids who are living in poverty who score very poorly on these tests. Most of the teachers, if we would really take seriously the issue of professional development and really give teachers the skills, they have, it's been mentioned here, they have artifacts, they have student work. We ought to be able to look at that student work and tell what it is that's going on in these classes. And I don't see what it is we need to spend a lot of money and a lot of time getting kids to be able to perform on a standardized test. What we need is ways of helping teachers be good observers. We need some instruments for them to be able to record their observations. We need to be able to have time for teachers to come together to look at kids and problem solve about what to do. And we need to have the resources to support teachers who are in classrooms with 27 or 28 kindergarten and first grade children with no help and are trying to help these kids learn social skills and be acclimated to their environment. It just seems to me we're asking the wrong question. We should be asking the question, tell me what it is you want to know. What do you want to know specifically? If you want to know how Johnny Jones compares to Sally Smith, why do you want to know that? I mean, I'll tell you the truth. What I have discovered, because there's been a lot of agitation around testing in New York. And what I find is that how the question gets asked indicates where you're coming from. So, for example, middle-class parents whose children are going to compete for getting into certain middle schools and high schools, when they ask the question, how's my kid doing? What they mean is, how's my child doing in comparison to your child? That is what they mean. When a working class parent asks that question, they want to know, is my kid going to get into the middle school? Are they going to get into a high school? It's a very different, they're not into the business of comparisons. Now, we have to try to work with parents, it seems to me, when you talk to parents about opting out. Parents are talking in the city about opting out of these tests. Interestingly enough, they're willing to opt out of the third grade test. They'll opt out of the fifth grade test. Why aren't they opting out of the fourth grade test? Because that score is used for entrance into certain middle schools. And now what's happening is, in order for that to change, the middle schools have to say, we're no longer going to use that as the major criteria for admission. Is that going to happen? I don't know. But the question of what we're doing, why do we want this? Is it for ranking and sorting? Well, I'm not real comfortable with that, because I think that kids need opportunities to learn and ways of trying to overcome the things that they come to school, perhaps with deficits, and that we need to find ways of trying to provide really good quality early education for those kids. And I don't think the testing is getting us there. We're not spending more money on kindergarten. We have class sizes are shooting up. So I guess my problem with this is we're at a stage now where we need to ask that question. We need to ask the question, what is this for? What information do we want? And what are some of the ways that the community of psychometricians can tell us how we can get that without making it a high-stakes experience?
Cliff, can I jump
Sure.
in here a second with the question? Because the one topic that we haven't discussed in any detail today is the relationship of all of this to teacher evaluations. And it seems to me that's a pretty important one. And I was at a panel a couple of months ago, which had a number of economists and psychometricians, and someone announced that the reasons why teachers liked observations was because they all were rated the same. Now, in 25 years of teaching, I've never heard a teacher say, the reason why I like observations is because it rates me as to the person next to me. What I have heard teachers say is that with observations, when they're done right, I can get actionable information on how to improve my teaching. No matter how you do value added, with the best value added score, that is completely useless for a teacher in terms of improving their teaching. And so to me it is still, I know it is received wisdom, but to me it's still an open question about whether that should have any role in teacher evaluation. And I'd just like to put that to the panel.
Okay, well, I'll take that question. And this is also allows me to somewhat address the other the question that was asked about, maybe it was a caution that we not go beyond, take noisy measures and overinterpret them. And I could not agree with that more. In fact, that's part of what I think keeps me employed is that, I sometimes see my role as trying to help policymakers extract the signal from the noise and remind them there are some policymakers who don't want to hear this, but there's always going to be noise, right? And so the two extremes, which is to treat let's say value-added scores which is really just the aggregation of test score data and taking into account the backgrounds of the students that teachers teach, to just throw it away completely and not use it, or treat it as if it's perfect. Both of those things are disastrous, I think. So it's really hard to be in the middle and to tell people, no, nuance. It can be an uncomfortable position to be in. But so the question was, well, if value-added scores, and I agree with this, don't give immediate feedback to teachers and tell them, because at a minimum, the immediate part is not going to be there, and then the detail doesn't tell you what about your instruction worked or didn't work. And so this is a frustration, to those of us who spend a lot of time estimating value-added models. So the question is there still value in it? And I think the answer is yes. It just may not be immediately apparent. I can see why teachers might not be as excited about it as compared to something that does give them more detailed, actionable evidence. That's why we need, a lot of different kinds of evidence combined. I just completed an experiment recently that we did for the U.S. Department of Education, in which we use value-added methods to identify the highest performing teachers in a district within their grade, within their sort of grade span and subject, taking it as if it's right. Okay, we don't know if it is or it's imperfect measure, and let's take the top 20% of those teachers, and offer them fairly large monetary incentives if they'll go teach in the hardest to staff schools or in the schools that are the lowest performing. And then we did a randomized experiment to look at what impact they have on student achievement after they transferred. And we found that in elementary schools they had a meaningful impact, a significant impact. And so, if you believe that there was no information there, if it was just a random subset of teachers, that they shouldn't be any better than the other teachers you would get to fill those positions, which was essentially what our randomized control group was. So, sort of taking this together with, this experiment that Tom Kane and his colleagues at Harvard and other institutions did on the Measuring Effective Teaching study did to randomly assign students to classrooms to try to look at the impact of teachers, at least within pairs. The evidence is starting to build that there is signal within the noise. And then I think we're still left with the challenge of, all right, well, how do we sort of align the decision making with the fact that these aren't perfect? We're going to get it wrong. And if we're going to get it wrong, we want to get it, we want to just only attach consequences to those decisions that we feel confident in. And that's really the challenge, and that's what we're, I think, hopefully collectively working to address.
One more question. Yes. Oh, wait a minute. We in the queue? Okay. Yes, we'll come back to you.
Hello, my name is Kate Shields. I'm from the American Institutes for Research, but I'm also a former teacher, and so I this question is more for Ann Cook. In a performance-based and teacher-driven, curriculum-based school, what does the teacher evaluation process look like, and how does that evaluation process affect their hiring or tenure, things like that? I know you talked a little bit about that, but I'm really interested in how those teachers, the retention rate is so high, so I'm guessing it's a good evaluation process, but I'm interested in more of the details of that.
Yeah. And in the spirit of trying to get in a couple more questions, could we be as brief and just?
I'm happy to answer
That's
it afterwards if you want. I can answer her afterwards if you want. If you want to move on. Okay.
Go ahead, Ann.
Well, first of all, I think that I don't agree with a lot of the teacher evaluation approaches, because I think that it undercuts what I think what it takes to have an effective school. What you need to have an effective school for kids is a professional community, a collaborative professional community. And what we should be trying to do is figure out what are the conditions that help create collaborative professional communities. Because in that environment, what you have is peer evaluation. You have a lot of support mechanisms for teachers. I think the Montgomery plan that was used in Montgomery County, where if teachers were having trouble, they had support, and there was a whole sort of system of giving support. I think we've worked out. I don't think we're happy with it because we're functioning within the constraints of what is there. I think we've worked out something, to be honest with you, that is as minimalist as we can possibly get it. And essentially, the schools themselves have internal mechanisms for really working with young staff, for really trying to improve the quality of education that's collegial. And I think that's the part that's missing. Teachers should not be functioning in isolation with one another. That's, to me, is a recipe for disaster. You can always find, and Hollywood is very attracted to the idea of teacher as hero. So they pick out one teacher, in a terrible school, and we've been doing this for 40 years with films about education. That isn't what makes a good school. One teacher does not make a good school. And what makes a good school are teachers coming together to work on what it is they're trying to do, because their mission, how are they going to address issues of kids who need help, and that's where you also put the teacher evaluation into that kind of an environment.
I'm Jerome Dancis. I'm a retired, mathematics professor, and I'd like to expand somewhat on, I think it was Stephen's comment that good tests are good and bad tests are bad, or something like that. And I was at a Maryland State Board of Education meeting, and the problem was that they thought that some of the questions on the math test had difficult wording for the students to understand, and so for the special education students, they were going to have an alternate question which had the same math content, but the wording was simpler. And I'm sitting there in the audience as a mathematician thinking that if I was writing this question for the regular students, I would have used simpler wording than they're using for the special education students. And it's unfortunate that the wordings on certainly on math exams are unnecessarily difficult, and certainly in Maryland, my sense is that the reading level on the math test is higher than the math level. Now you were talking a lot about multiple.
Are you coming to a question, or you just want to give comments to the presentation? I want to get one more in.
Well, I'll be quick. It's not just, of course, with multiple choice versus written response. There's good multiple choice, and there's not good multiple choice, and the latter is far more common. And the same is true for the written response. I can talk more about that later. But there's a third option. Certainly, in math, you can ask students just to type in the answer, and that will. And if it's you get a lot more information than if you do multiple choice. And
let me ask the panel. Can you guys just stay around and have a conversation with this mathematics professor. And I want to get his question in the queue back here. No, they're going to converse with you. Yes, sir.
Hi, my name's Steve Wojtkiewicz. I work in Ed Issues at AFT.
This is the last question.
Okay, and this is a great panel to ask here. I've been wondering for a long time about the essential validity threat that's presented by the application of high stakes to a test. If a test is a random sample of a subject and teaching to the domain is okay, but if you teach that particular sample through test prep, it damages or even invalidates the validity of the test. So how do we drill down all the way to the very bottom and say that these tests are valid when there are high stakes attached to them that can cause people to teach in ways that would threaten their validity?
We can do pre or post. You can do it after. You don't know?
Yeah, I mean, I would just say I
response?
share that concern, and fortunately for me, I'm not a test developer, so I don't have the solution. But I hope that we keep asking exactly those kinds of questions and saying, well, is there some reason that teachers would know what the sampled items are? Because that would be a problem. That gets at the corruptibility issue. I mean, that term maybe is not encompassing enough because it makes it sound like everything is very intentional, or that teachers have bad motives, and I don't think that's the case. I think the general message, we got to keep, for all the people who are criticizing standardized tests, please keep doing that. Otherwise, we're not going to get better ones.
Stuart, you go.
The only comment I would make is there are many kinds of validity, and there are many different ways of looking at them as a result. I mean, obviously, the high-stakes testing people would bring up the issue of security, and the kids haven't seen them before, and so on and so forth. But then again, you get at the idea of the teaching to the test and so on. So what are you really measuring? That's why I think more authentic measures are more authentic in a variety of ways. And, if you see the kids' work, I mean, I was doing a research study where we had we did some pre and post testing. Ultimately, we don't recommend pre-testing for some purposes, but if a kid saw a question, wrote an essay in the fall, and then got the same prompt or whatever in the spring, if that kid could reproduce a wonderful answer and attend to all the characteristics of good writing, he's probably okay. I mean, so I think that was almost getting at the idea of what's worth teaching too, But here's a case where I'm not concerned about whether the kid has seen that question before or not. Also, there's the consequential validity is certainly a big one too, and that relates to the impact of multiple choice on instruction and local testing. Yeah.
Let's thank the panel and yourselves. And we didn't fully address your commentary. They'll be here to do so. And if anyone else would like to come forward, the panel's going to hang out for a while.